I'm Michelle, 32 female. I live in a city I built for myself, in a condo overlooking a skyline I once thought was impossibly out of reach. I run my own digital marketing agency, a company born from late nights, cheap coffee, and a desperate need to prove everyone wrong. This story isn't just about building a business. It's about what happens when the family that called you a failure suddenly needs a handout from the college dropout loser they created. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my family portrait was always slightly off balance. On one side, you had Ethan, my older brother, bathed in a perpetual golden light. On the other, there was me, usually in his shadow, trying to find a spot where the light might accidentally hit me. Our parents weren't cruel people, not in the traditional sense. They were just biased. Their world was built on a very narrow definition of success, one that was paved with prestigious degrees, high-status professions, and the quiet, respectable approval of their social circle. Ethan walked that path like he was born on it. I, on the other hand, kept tripping over the cobblestones. Ethan was 4 years older, and from the moment he could form sentences, he was destined for greatness. He was the future doctor before he even finished elementary school. He aced every test, captained the debate team, and played just enough piano to charm every adult at family gatherings. He was my parents' masterpiece, a living, breathing testament to their good parenting and superior genes. They poured everything into him: the best tutors, the summer science camps, the endless praise. Their pride was a tangible thing, a thick, warm blanket they wrapped around him at all times. My achievements, modest as they were always met with a polite but distracted, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Ethan won the state science fair?" It wasn't that they didn't love me. It was just that their love for Ethan's success was brighter, louder, and far more intoxicating. I was different. While Ethan was memorizing the periodic table, I was sketching logos in my notebooks. While he was dissecting frogs, I was dissecting bad ad campaigns on TV, trying to figure out why they didn't work. My mind didn't move in the straight, logical lines that school demanded. It zigzagged, connected disparate ideas, and saw patterns where others saw chaos. This was not a trait my parents valued. They saw it as a lack of focus, a flightiness that needed to be corrected. "You can't make a living doodling, Michelle," my father would say, his tone more weary than angry. My mother would just sigh and gently push a math textbook in my direction. The pressure to follow in Ethan's footsteps was immense. I was pushed into advanced science and math classes where I struggled to stay afloat. My grades were average, a cardinal sin in a household where A- was cause for a concerned family meeting. Every report card was a comparison. "Why can't you apply yourself like Ethan does?" was the constant refrain. I felt like a faulty replica of a perfect original. I was trying to run a race I was never built for, and with every stumble, the disappointment in my parents' eyes grew a little deeper. Ethan, for his part, played the role of the benevolent older brother perfectly, at least in front of our parents. He'd offer to help me with my homework, which usually involved him doing the problems in 3 minutes and then explaining them to me with an air of patronizing patience, as if I were a particularly dense toddler. His help always made me feel smaller, less capable. It wasn't about lifting me up, it was about reinforcing his own superiority. The breaking point came during my second year of college. I was enrolled in a pre-med program, a compromise that felt more like a surrender. I was miserable. The lectures felt like a foreign language, the labs filled me with a sense of dread, and I was spending every waking moment cramming information into my brain that my heart actively rejected. I saw my future stretching out before me, a life of pretending, of chasing a dream that belonged to my parents, not to me. My creativity was suffocating. The one bright spot was an introductory business class I'd taken as an elective. My professor, a man named Evans, saw something in me. He saw the way I analyzed case studies, the innovative marketing ideas I'd propose, and he told me I had a natural instinct for it. For the first time, someone in a position of authority saw me, not as a failed version of my brother, but as someone with unique potential. One night, after bombing a chemistry midterm I'd studied for all week, I hit a wall. I couldn't do it anymore. I called my parents, my voice shaking, and told them I was dropping out of pre-med. I tried to explain that I wanted to switch to a business major, that I had found something I was passionate about. The silence on the other end of the line was colder than any winter night. When my father finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a disappointment that felt like a physical weight. "You're throwing your life away, Michelle," he said. "Don't come crying to us when this art project of yours fails." My mother just wept quietly. The message was clear. In their eyes, I had chosen to be a failure. When Ethan found out, he called me. There was no sympathy, only scorn. "You're really going to embarrass them like this?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm building a career, becoming a surgeon to make them proud, and you're dropping out to what? Draw pictures. Do you have any idea how selfish that is?" He painted my decision as a personal betrayal to the family, an act of rebellion designed to shame them. He twisted my desperation to find my own path into a childish tantrum. That was the moment I realized he didn't see me as a sister. He saw me as a supporting character in his story, and I was going off script. The family portrait was now irrevocably broken. Ethan was the golden child, shining brighter than ever as he entered medical school. And I was the black sheep, cast out into the wilderness for daring to want a different pasture. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of the narrative they would spin about me. The fallout from my decision was swift and brutal. Dropping out of pre-med wasn't just a change in academic direction. In my family's eyes, it was a public declaration of failure. The narrative was set in stone almost immediately. Ethan, the brilliant and dedicated son, was on his way to becoming a prestigious doctor. Michelle, the flighty and unfocused daughter, was a college dropout. It was a simple, digestible story they could tell their friends, and they clung to it like a life raft. The nuance of my wanting to pursue a business degree was completely lost, deliberately ignored because it didn't fit the dramatic tale of the prodigal daughter who threw it all away. I moved into a tiny, rundown apartment off campus with a friend and enrolled in a few business courses at the local community college. I had to pay for it myself, working 2 part-time jobs, one as a waitress and another doing data entry for a small local company. My days were a blur of exhaustion. I'd attend classes in the morning, rush to the office for my data entry shift, and then spend my evenings on my feet, balancing plates and dealing with rude customers. I'd get home late, my feet aching and my mind numb, only to have to study for a few hours before collapsing into bed. It was grueling, but a strange thing happened amidst the struggle. I felt alive. For the first time, I was working towards something that was mine. My small successes, acing a marketing exam, getting a compliment from my boss on my efficiency, were tiny sparks of light in the darkness. My parents' support, both financial and emotional, had vanished overnight. My calls home became infrequent and strained. My mother would answer, her voice filled with a sad, resigned tone. Conversations were short and superficial. She'd ask if I was okay, in a way that suggested she expected me to be falling apart. She'd then spend 10 minutes gushing about Ethan's latest triumphs in medical school, his perfect scores, the praise from his professors, the prestigious residency programs already scouting him. Every word was an unintentional dagger, reminding me of the pedestal he stood on and the hole I was in. My father was even more distant. He'd get on the phone for a perfunctory hello, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. He never asked about my classes or my jobs. In his mind, I had made my bed, and he was determined to let me lie in it. The real architect of my exile, however, was Ethan. He took our parents' disappointment and weaponized it. He was entering the phase of his life where he started bringing home a serious girlfriend, a woman named Vanessa. She was perfect for him, ambitious, sharp-tongued, and from a family with a similar obsession with status. Vanessa was an investment banker, and she looked at the world as a series of assets and liabilities. It was clear from our first excruciatingly awkward meeting that I was firmly in the liability column. She looked at my second-hand clothes and my tired eyes with a thinly veiled pity that was worse than outright scorn. Together, Ethan and Vanessa became the gatekeepers of my family's story. At family gatherings that I was sometimes begrudgingly invited to, they would hold court. They'd talk about their upcoming charity galas, their plans to buy a condo in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, and of course, Ethan's brilliant future as a cardiologist. When the conversation turned to me, Ethan would adopt a tone of weary concern. "We're all just so worried about Michelle," he'd say to a listening aunt or uncle, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. "It's tough to see someone with potential just give up, but we're hoping she finds her way eventually." Vanessa would nod sympathetically, adding, "It's just so hard to get by without a proper degree these days. We try to help, but she's very independent." Their words were poison wrapped in concern. They weren't just telling people I was a dropout. They were crafting a detailed portrait of me as a lost, struggling, and slightly pitiable figure. They made it seem like my jobs as a waitress and a data entry clerk were not a means to an end, but my final destination. They painted my independence as stubborn pride, my ambition as a childish fantasy. The thriving business I dreamed of was dismissed as a silly hobby. They told everyone I was a loser, but they did it with a sad shake of the head, which made it all the more effective. People didn't see them as cruel. They saw them as the concerned, successful family members burdened with a black sheep. The worst part was that my parents let it happen. They absorbed Ethan and Vanessa's version of the story and repeated it. When their friends asked about me, they'd sigh and say, "Michelle is figuring things out. Thank goodness we have Ethan to be proud of." They never defended me. They never mentioned that I was working 2 jobs and still getting a 4 at community college. They never mentioned the business plan I excitedly tried to show them, which they had dismissed without a second glance. It was easier to accept the simple narrative. The golden child and the washout. It was clean, it was simple, and it absolved them of any responsibility for my choices. I was no longer just the daughter who chose a different path. I was the family's official cautionary tale. The shame they felt about my decision was so profound that they would rather cast me as a failure than admit their definition of success might not be the only one. I was written off, a closed chapter in the grand book of our family's achievements, a book whose only hero was my brother. Years passed. The grind of my early 20s was relentless, but it was also formative. I finished my associate's degree in business with top honors and transferred to a state university, this time on a small scholarship I had earned through sheer academic grit. I continued to work, saving every penny I could. My apartment was still small, my diet still consisted of too much ramen, but my focus was absolute. I wasn't just getting a degree anymore, I was building an arsenal. Every marketing class, every finance project, every late-night study session was another weapon I was forging for the future I was determined to create. During this time, my contact with my family dwindled to a bare minimum. A text on birthdays, a 5-minute phone call on holidays. The conversations were always the same. They'd ask a polite, surface-level question about my life, I'd give a vague but positive answer, and then the topic would immediately shift to Ethan. Dr. Ethan, now. He had completed his residency and was a rising star in the cardiology department of a prestigious city hospital. He and Vanessa had gotten married in a lavish ceremony I wasn't invited to. They cited limited space, but I knew the real reason. A dropout waitress daughter didn't fit the aesthetic of their perfect day. I saw the photos on social media later. My parents were beaming, standing next to the happy couple, the picture of a proud, successful family. There was no space for me in that frame. My best friend, Chloe, was my rock through all of it. We had met in a design class, and she was one of the few people who understood my ambition. She was a brilliant graphic designer, and we often spent hours brainstorming, sketching out ideas for the agency I dreamed of opening one day. "They have no idea who they're messing with," she'd say, after I'd finished recounting another cold conversation with my mother. "One day, they're going to see, and they're going to be so sorry." Her faith in me was a lifeline. The discovery of just how deep the smear campaign went happened by accident. I was about 28 at the time, and I had finally graduated with my bachelor's degree. I'd started doing freelance marketing work on the side, slowly building a client base. I was at a local coffee shop meeting a potential client, a woman who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios. We were having a great conversation, and she seemed impressed with my portfolio. Towards the end of the meeting, she paused and gave me a curious look. "Your last name is familiar," she said. "Do you happen to be related to Dr. Ethan?" I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "Yes," I said cautiously. "He's my brother." Her expression shifted to one of sympathy. "Oh, wow. It's so great to see you doing so well for yourself, then. Vanessa is a member at our downtown studio. She and your brother talk about you sometimes." My blood ran cold. I managed a weak smile and asked, "Oh, really? What do they say?" I tried to make the question sound casual, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. The woman hesitated, clearly realizing she might have stepped on a landmine. "Well," she began, choosing her words carefully, "they just mention how you had a tough time after leaving college, that you've been working service jobs for years and have had some trouble finding your footing. They always say they hope you find some stability soon. It's really wonderful that you're starting this new venture. Good for you for pulling yourself up." The words hit me like a physical blow. Pulling myself up? A new venture? They were painting my carefully constructed career path as a desperate, last-ditch effort. They weren't just saying I was a dropout. They were actively maintaining the narrative that I was a perpetual failure, a charity case they worried about from their pedestal of success. The whispers weren't just whispers. They were a calculated, ongoing campaign to define me to the world before I had a chance to define myself. I felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation wash over me. This whole time, while I was working 60-hour weeks, putting myself through school, and slowly building a foundation for my future, my own brother and his wife were telling anyone who would listen that I was a lost cause. I went home that day in a daze. Chloe was at my apartment, and she knew the second she saw my face that something was wrong. I told her everything the client had said. Her expression hardened. "That's it," she said, her voice low and furious. "That is just evil, Michelle. They're not just ignoring your success, they're trying to actively sabotage your reputation." She was right. It wasn't about family disappointment anymore. This was malicious. This was about ensuring that no matter what I achieved, I would always be seen through the lens of failure they had created for me. They needed me to be the loser in their story because it made their success shine that much brighter. The family portrait required a shadow, and they had chosen me to be it. That conversation was a turning point. The hurt that had simmered for years crystallized into cold, hard resolve. My ambition was no longer just about proving to myself that I could succeed. It was now about dismantling the false narrative they had so carefully constructed. I had to become so successful that their lies would look absurd. I had to build an empire so large that their whispers would be drowned out by the sound of my own success. The fight was no longer just for my future, it was for my past and my present. It was a fight for my story, and I was determined to be the one to write the ending. Fueled by a new kind of fire, I poured every ounce of my energy into my work. My freelance business began to grow. I was good at what I did. I had a knack for seeing a brand's potential and creating strategies that delivered real results. My clients were happy, and they started referring me to others. Within a year, I had more work than I could handle on my own. It was time to take the leap. I drained my savings, leased a small office space in a trendy, up-and-coming part of the city, and officially launched Phoenix Marketing, a name that felt deeply personal. I hired Chloe as my head of creative, and we started building our team. The first couple of years were a blur of hard work and sacrifice. There were moments of doubt and fear, nights when I stared at the ceiling wondering if I had made a huge mistake. But every time I felt like giving up, I would remember the sympathetic, pitying look on that client's face in the coffee shop. I would remember the whispers, and I would get back to work. We landed a major contract with a regional tech startup, then another with a well-known fashion brand. Our reputation grew. We were known for being innovative, agile, and fiercely dedicated to our clients. My life began to change. I moved out of my tiny apartment and into the beautiful condo downtown. I could finally afford to travel, to invest, to breathe. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. As my own life became more stable and successful, a strange curiosity began to grow. For years, I had accepted the story of Ethan and Vanessa's perfect life at face value. Dr. Ethan, the brilliant cardiologist. Vanessa, the high-flying investment banker. The power couple with the perfect marriage, the perfect home, the perfect everything. But now, with a clearer head and a more confident perspective, I started to wonder, was their life really as flawless as they portrayed it? The same analytical skills I used to dissect brands for my clients, I began to turn, just slightly, toward my brother's carefully curated image. It started with small things. I had a friend from college whose cousin was a nurse at the same hospital where Ethan worked. We were out for drinks one night, and I casually mentioned my brother's name. "Oh, Dr. Et." "Han," she said, a strange note in her voice. "Yeah, everyone knows him. Brilliant doctor for sure, but he has a bit of a reputation." I pressed her gently and she elaborated. "He's arrogant," she said. "Talks down to the nurses, thinks he's a gift from God. A lot of people find him difficult to work with. He's also a bit of a gambler. There are always rumors floating around about him losing big at the high-stakes poker nights some of the senior doctors run." A gambler, that didn't fit the image of the responsible, perfect son. It was the first crack in the facade. I didn't actively go digging for more information, but I started paying more attention. I kept my ears open. Social media, which had once been a source of pain, became a source of information. Vanessa's posts were a masterclass in image cultivation. Pictures of them at charity balls, on lavish vacations in Tuscany, clinking champagne glasses on their penthouse balcony. The captions were always full of hashtags like blessed, power couple, living our best life. It was all so perfect, it started to feel brittle. The real breakthrough came through a new client. We were hired by a boutique financial advisory firm to overhaul their digital presence. The firm specialized in wealth management for high-net-worth individuals. During one of our discovery meetings, I was talking to the firm's senior partner. As we were building rapport, he mentioned the investment bank where Vanessa worked. "Ah, yes," he said with a wry smile. "We've had a few of their former clients come to us recently. That place has a bit of a revolving door. Very high pressure. Make the numbers or you're out kind of culture." He then mentioned a recent scandal where a few bankers had been let go for engaging in overly risky, borderline unethical trading strategies to boost their commissions. He didn't mention Vanessa by name, but a quick, discreet search on financial news sites from that period revealed an article about the internal investigation. Her name wasn't there, but her department was at the center of the storm. Putting the pieces together, a new picture began to emerge. Ethan's arrogance at work and a potential gambling habit. Vanessa's high-stress job in a scandal-plagued department. Their lifestyle was incredibly expensive. The mortgage on their penthouse alone had to be astronomical, not to mention the designer clothes, the luxury cars, the five-star vacations. Could they really afford it all on their salaries, as impressive as they were? Or was it possible that the perfect life they projected was built on a foundation of debt and risky behavior? Was the constant need to put me down, to paint me as a failure, not just about their own egos, but about a desperate need to feel superior while they were privately struggling to keep their own perfect world from imploding? The investigation wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about understanding. I needed to know the truth behind the lies they had told about me. And the more I learned, the more I realized that their perfect facade was just that, a thin veneer hiding a reality that was likely far more messy and precarious than anyone knew. They weren't the gods on Olympus I had always imagined them to be. They were just people, flawed and insecure, who had built their identities on a narrative of success that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. And their favorite chapter in that narrative was the one about their failure of a sister. The irony was suffocating. They were so busy writing my story that they had completely neglected their own. The knowledge that Ethan and Vanessa's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed didn't bring me immediate satisfaction. Instead, it sharpened my focus. My goal shifted from simply proving them wrong to creating a level of success that was undeniable and, more importantly, stable. I wanted to build something real, something that wasn't a facade. While they were potentially propping up their lifestyle with debt and risky behavior, I was going to build mine on solid ground. Hard work, integrity, and genuine achievement. The next 3 years were about strategic growth. Phoenix Marketing was no longer a plucky startup. We were becoming a serious player in the industry. I reinvested our profits back into the company, hiring the best talent I could find. We expanded our services, moving into data analytics and web development. I was a demanding boss, but I was also a fair one. I remembered what it felt like to be overlooked and undervalued, and I made it a point to foster a culture where creativity and hard work were recognized and rewarded. Chloe, my ever-loyal friend and creative genius, was now a partner in the firm. Together, we were a formidable team. Our big break came when we were invited to pitch for the national marketing account of a major sustainable energy company. It was a massive opportunity, the kind that could elevate us from a successful local agency to a nationally recognized firm. The competition was fierce. We were up against huge, established agencies from New York and Chicago. Many people thought we didn't stand a chance, but we had an edge. We were hungry, we were innovative, and we understood the culture of a forward-thinking company better than the old guard firms did. We spent 2 months preparing for that pitch. Our team worked around the clock. I personally oversaw every detail, from the market research to the final presentation deck. It was the most challenging professional experience of my life. The night before the final presentation in Chicago, I barely slept. I kept thinking about my journey, the waitress jobs, the community college classes, the condescending tone in my brother's voice. This was my chance to slam the door on that past, to prove to myself, once and for all, that the person they said I was had never really existed. We nailed the presentation. Our ideas were fresh, our data was solid, and our passion was palpable. A week later, I got the call. We had won the account. I remember sliding down the wall in my office, phone in hand, and just crying. They were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and vindication. Chloe found me a few minutes later, and we opened a bottle of champagne we'd been saving for a special occasion. We had done it. We were on the map. The news of our success traveled fast. We were featured in industry magazines and business journals. My name, Michelle, the college dropout, was now followed by CEO and founder of the award-winning Phoenix Marketing. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I started getting invitations to speak at business conferences and universities. During one of these talks, at my own alma mater, I saw my old mentor, Professor Evans, in the audience. He had tears in his eyes. Afterward, he came up and gave me a huge hug. "I always knew it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always saw that spark in you." His validation felt more meaningful than any award. Throughout this period of intense growth, I had almost no contact with my family. They must have been aware of my success. It would have been impossible for them not to be. But their silence was deafening. There were no congratulatory calls, no proud texts. It was as if my success was an inconvenient truth that they had collectively decided to ignore. It didn't fit their narrative. How could the family loser be featured in a business magazine? How could the unstable, flighty daughter be the CEO of a company that was now worth millions? Their silence told me everything I needed to know. My success wasn't just a failure of their predictions. It was a fundamental challenge to their worldview and their place in it. I didn't reach out to them. My energy was focused on building, not on looking back. But I knew a day of reckoning was coming. It was inevitable. The universe has a funny way of bringing stories to a climax. For years, I had been the subject of their carefully crafted fiction. Now I had my own story, one built on facts, figures, and undeniable success. And I sensed that soon there would be a collision, a moment when their fiction would have to face my reality. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I had spent a decade climbing my way out of the hole they had put me in. I had reached the top, and the view was spectacular. Now, I just had to wait for them to look up. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon. It was a thick, cream-colored card with elegant gold lettering, inviting me to a dinner party at Ethan and Vanessa's penthouse. The occasion was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. A refusal was not really an option without creating a different kind of family drama, and besides, I felt a calm sense of inevitability. The time had come. For years, they had curated the audience and the narrative. This time, I would be walking into their theater as a different character, entirely, one they hadn't written. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple but impeccably tailored black dress that spoke of quiet confidence, not flashy wealth. I drove myself to their building, the same one they had used as a symbol of their success for years. As the elevator ascended, I felt a strange sense of calm. The nervous, insecure girl who used to dread these encounters was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, a CEO who managed a team of 50 people and multi-million-dollar accounts. I was no longer seeking their approval. I was simply there to observe the final act of a long-running play. When Vanessa opened the door, her polished smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She hadn't seen me in person in over 4 years. I was no longer the tired, stressed-out student in second-hand clothes. The surprise in her eyes was my first small victory. "Michelle," she said, recovering quickly. "You look well." She led me onto their balcony, where the party was in full swing. It was their usual crowd, a collection of doctors, bankers, and other members of the city's elite, all sipping expensive wine and talking about their latest acquisitions. My parents saw me and came over. Their greeting was awkward, a mix of surprise and a discomfort they couldn't quite hide. "Michelle, it's good to see you," my mother said, giving me a hesitant hug. My father just nodded, his eyes scanning my dress, my shoes, my handbag, as if trying to calculate my net worth. But the main event was Ethan. He strode over, a glass of scotch in hand, with the same air of smug superiority he had always worn. "Michelle," he boomed a little too loudly. "Glad you could make it. We were starting to wonder if you were too busy with your little company to see your own family." The condescension was automatic, a reflex he had honed over years. But this time, it didn't land. I just smiled calmly. "It is a busy time," I said, my voice even. "Winning the Apex Energy account has been all-consuming. National campaigns are a lot of work." I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. A few people nearby overheard the name of the company, a major player in the business world, and their ears perked up. One of the men, a surgeon who worked with Ethan, turned to me. "You landed the Apex account? My God, that's huge. I saw the article about your firm in the Business Chronicle. Phoenix Marketing, right? Very impressive." The atmosphere shifted subtly. The whispers near me were no longer about the dropout sister. They were about the CEO. Vanessa shot Ethan a panicked look. Their narrative was crumbling in real time in front of the very audience they had cultivated it for. Dinner was served at a long, beautifully set table. I was seated between a distant aunt and one of Ethan's colleagues. The conversation was polite, but the tension was simmering just below the surface. The final confrontation was initiated, as I knew it would be, by my father. After the main course, he stood up to make a toast. He spoke about his long and happy marriage, and then he turned his attention to his children. "We are so proud," he said, beaming at Ethan, "to have a son who has achieved so much. A respected cardiologist, a pillar of his community. He has given us so much to be proud of." He then glanced at me, almost as an afterthought. "And we're so glad to see Michelle is doing well for herself now, too." The dismissiveness of it, the faint praise after years of scorn, was the final straw. But I didn't get angry, I just waited. After the toast, Ethan, emboldened by the wine and his father's praise, decided to press his advantage. He turned to me, a smirk on his face. "It's a tough world out there, isn't it?" he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "I'm just glad my stable career could help Mom and Dad out, especially now." He looked at my parents pointedly. I froze. "Help them out with what?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Ethan's smirk widened. He thought he was about to deliver the final blow, reminding everyone of his role as the responsible, successful son. "Oh, you didn't know? Dad's little investment fund went under a few months ago. Lost a big chunk of their retirement savings. I had to co-sign a loan to help them keep this house and stay afloat. But don't worry, it's all taken care of." The table went silent. He had meant to shame me, to expose my ignorance and my distance from the family's real problems. He expected me to be embarrassed. He expected me to shrink. He didn't expect me to look him dead in the eye and say, "That's interesting, because I also happen to know that you've lost over $200,000 in the last year at your little high-stakes poker game. And Vanessa, your performance bonuses have been a bit thin since your department's ethics scandal, haven't they? Tell me, Ethan, which bank gave you a loan big enough to cover your parents' losses and your own on a cardiologist's salary?" You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa's face went white as a sheet. Ethan looked like he had been slapped. My words, delivered calmly and without malice, had detonated their entire world. The whispers and rumors I had heard were now laid bare on the dinner table. How did you know that?" Ethan stammered. I took a slow sip of my water. You see, Ethan, my little company does more than just advertising. We do market research. We analyze data. We see patterns. It's my job to know things. And what I know is that you two have been living a lie. A beautiful, expensive lie propped up by debt and arrogance. You spent so many years telling everyone I was a failure, maybe because you were terrified you wouldn't be able to maintain your own success. I turned to my parents. "I'm sorry about your savings. If you had bothered to call me, to treat me like a daughter instead of a disappointment, I would have written you a check for the full amount, no questions asked. But you chose your golden boy. And it seems his gold was just gold plating." I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. "Thank you for dinner," I said to the stunned room. "It's been truly illuminating." I walked out of that apartment, leaving the shattered pieces of their perfect facade behind me. The reckoning was over. The days following the dinner party were silent. The silence from my family was no longer the cold, dismissive quiet I was used to. It was the heavy, loaded silence of a battlefield after the war. I didn't expect an apology, and I didn't get one. What I got, about a week later, was a frantic, rambling voicemail from my mother. She didn't apologize for the years of neglect or for taking Ethan's side. Instead, she cried about the humiliation I had caused, how I had aired the family's private matters in front of their friends. She accused me of being cruel and vindictive. And then, in the same breath, she tentatively asked if my offer to help them financially was still on the table. I listened to the message once and then I deleted it. For the first time, it didn't hurt. It didn't make me angry. It just made me feel nothing. The emotional hold they had on me was finally broken. Their world, their validation, their definition of success, it all seemed so small and insignificant now. They weren't angry that they had wronged me. They were angry that I had exposed them. Their concern wasn't for our relationship, but for their reputation and their bank account. I sent them a check through my lawyer. It was for the exact amount my father had lost, not a penny more. Attached was a note, not from me, but from my attorney, stating that this was a one-time, no-strings-attached gift and that any future requests for financial assistance would be denied. It also included paperwork severing my legal obligation for any of their future elder care, a preemptive strike against the inevitable assumption that the successful daughter would foot the bill. It was a cold, clinical transaction, a final closing of the books. I was paying off my emotional debt, buying my freedom from their toxic cycle of judgment and expectation. Chloe asked me if I felt sad about it. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not sad about losing them. I'm sad for the family I never had. But you can't mourn something that never really existed." I had spent so much of my life trying to earn a place at their table, only to realize I was better off building my own. And my new table was full. It was filled with people like Chloe, my loyal friend and business partner. It was filled with my incredible team at Phoenix Marketing, people I respected and who respected me. It was filled with mentors, clients, and friends who saw me for who I was, not for who my family wanted me to be. As for Ethan and Vanessa, their downfall was quiet but complete. Their carefully constructed social standing couldn't survive the truth. News of their financial troubles and Ethan's gambling problem spread through their circle like wildfire. The power couple image was shattered. They ended up having to sell their penthouse and move to a much smaller house in the suburbs. Ethan kept his job at the hospital, but his reputation was tarnished. Vanessa eventually left the high-pressure world of investment banking for a less glamorous corporate finance job. They got what they deserved, not through some grand, vengeful act of mine, but through the simple, inevitable collapse of their own lies. Their punishment was having to live with the mundane reality they had tried so desperately to escape. Today, my life is full and it is mine. Phoenix Marketing is a leader in the industry. I still work hard, but it's a labor of love. I travel, I invest in other startups run by young women with big dreams, and I make sure to mentor those who, like me, don't fit the traditional mold. I never set out to destroy my family. I only ever wanted to build a life for myself. The revenge was not in their downfall, but in my rise. It was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had succeeded not just in spite of them, but because of them. Their doubt was the fuel. Their scorn was the motivation. They told everyone I was a college dropout loser, and in doing so, they gave me the one thing I needed most: a reason to prove them wrong. I built my own throne, not of gold or jewels, but of resilience, hard work, and the sweet, quiet victory of writing my own damn story. And from up here, I can finally see that the shadow they cast was never that big to begin with.